So what you'll see as well as I read out the bios of each of the four HDR students is that their work really kind of connects to or speaks to the particular themes that were covered in their respective panel. So what we'll do is go in the order that they appear, and I will introduce them in turn. And then after all of that, there may be a moment for maybe one or two more questions, depending how we go for time, and then I'll hand over to Melanie for some closing remarks. So our first speaker, taking us right back to the start of the day on our panel, I just have to remind myself what the title of it was. Law, Institutions and Society. It feels like a lifetime ago, but let's get a nice reminder from Nicole Campbell, who's a researcher here at WSU, and whose work, as you'll see, connects to the topic itself, spans governance, public administration and ethics, focusing on local government and collaboration. She's a co-author of studies on municipal reform and failure in New South Wales, working on urban transformation, including in the Bays precinct in Sydney, and her scholarship highlights the challenges and possibilities of collaborative governance in shaping democratic and sustainable futures for local communities. So over to you, Nicole, for, I think we've given them each 5 to 6 minutes.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. What time is it? 5:13. Wow, what an amazing day. Are you all a bit brain dead? Yeah, that's okay. I am too, and I'm speaking. So, look, I have got the happy job of doing some reflections on panel 1, which was on the law, institutions and society. But before I do that, what I really, really want to do is to ask everybody to put their hands together for all of the speakers, everybody who asked questions, everybody who's helped make this amazing event come together, because I don't know about you guys, but this has blown my mind. Okay, so just to give a little bit of context to my remarks, yes, I am an urban geographer, and I am at Western Sydney Uni Institute for Culture and Society. My specific PhD project is looking at socio-spatial polarisation within Western Sydney as a region. So for those of you that are familiar with Western Sydney, it is a vast region. And I've provocatively called it behind the latte line, because I'm sick of those latte line heat maps that I see in the newspaper. Western Sydney is very, very diverse, and that's what I'm going to explore. But I'm looking at the power relations between the various agents, both internal and external to government, and how they actually make the decisions about the location for large infrastructure projects within Western Sydney. So that's what my project is, and I have a great time doing it. Okay, but if we think back to the beginning of today, panel 1. So okay, this was law, institution and society, which is absolutely my bag. I love this stuff. Okay, and I think taken collectively, the presentations from Brett and Sonia and Ihab provided a lot of really, really valuable insights for HDR students. So I think my approach to this is really reflecting on what were the hot takes for me, and as an HDR student going forward, what were the things that I really valued. I valued all of them, obviously. But Brett noticed the importance of thinking about how questions rather than what questions, and that really had an impact on me. So how to theorise, how to do things with theory. And of course, the idea that theory is not just some fleeting ephemeral thought. It's also not a philosophy, and that theory can build incrementally. And I think the great thing that I've learned about today is that I certainly, from my experience, kind of like try to lock into a theory. And so to hear reiterated over and over again that theories are open-ended, they're always open to challenge, that they can be provocative, they can be subversive, they can change, they can go in and out of fashion. And that was really good for me to know, you know. Theory's also about trying to make sense of the world, but as well as looking forward, and a lot of our speakers talked about, you know, the shiny new thing or the new toolbox, and everyone says, oh, you know, here's my theory 2 daggy now. To look forward and be aware of what's coming out in terms of new theories, but also don't forget the value in reaching back. And that was an important message. Another one was that you do not use theory. You're not going to use Foucault. You're going to work through the world as you see it, and you need to think through theory as you're actually involved in doing the work of your research. And Ihab noted the importance of identifying starting points and standing points, and I thought that was really, really important. Sonia noted that some critics of theory say that it hasn't provided useful knowledge and that theoretical curiosity can become a kind of an add-on. And our presenters all argue that theory should be considered, you know, as an ethos, and that it becomes a knowledge. It's a slow thing, and it's never neutral. And you know, knowledge it's got to stay open, it's got to stay risky, and even as in some of the discussions today we explored, even when, you know, institutions try and contain it. I really, really liked Brett's analogy of theory as akin to building an installation, and the idea that it must stand up. It's got to have some sort of logic to stand up, but that it will eventually come down. And the idea that theory must be fit for the purpose of what it is that you're doing, you know, putting different things together to explain how you're seeing the world. And you may need to draw on a range of different theories to make your new installation. And I thought about this in the context of my journey in developing my theoretical framework. I would love to stand here and say it was an easy and uncomplicated process. The reality is I was fully immersed and drowning in a theory soup. I think I changed my approach at least 3 times a month, depending on what I last read. But as I read more and as I started to understand more, I started to realise that it was actually okay for me to use my voice to say, well, you know, I'm just not sure about that, and to critically analyse how the various theories I was looking at intersected with my research questions and how they were adding value. And if they weren't, it was actually okay to set them aside. And it was an iterative process, and it was slow work, and it was hard work, but it did help build my knowledge, and it gave me a really solid foundation for my research. Another important takeaway for me, and this really came through in the questions following the panel 1, was the importance for us all to be brave as we approach theory. Yes, it can be difficult, and it can turn normal HDR students into a quivering mass of jelly, or bizarrely, apparently it turns some of them into raging Lotharios who were probably very crushing bores at parties. But Sonia's challenge to us all was to face the fear, face the uncertainty of theory and of not knowing everything. She mentioned the importance of reading, and that moment where you will have that eureka moment and you'll go, yes, I got it, you know? So look at what you're trying to examine, articulate the problem that you're wanting to investigate, read, listen, discuss, and you'll find the theories that add value to your work. So I want to call on all of us to take Sonia's advice and look theory in the eye and take it on. My final takeaway point was the important thing that theory is not something that you do alone. And sometimes writing a PhD can be a bit of a lonely experience. But thinking about theory is very much a collaborative exercise. So if we all make the effort to reach out, to talk to each other, to discuss, to argue, all of that stuff, through this process, I think we will all continue to learn and grow as scholars.
Thanks very much. So now we'll go on to panel number 2, the material and the immaterial, and commenting on that is Miles Oakley, who I think the bio says a PhD candidate, but is actually a very recent post-PhD. in the School of Humanities at Sydney and a research assistant with the biocultural diversities team at the Sydney Environment Institute. I'm going to keep bios that short going forward and ask everyone to keep to 5 minutes. So over to you, Miles.
So having just submitted my PhD, it's nice to step away and listen to everyone else's wonderful projects and ideas. So today's been a really nice, refreshing and inspiring day. So thank you to everyone who spoke. I've been asked to sort of speak to some of the concepts that came up in the material session today. We heard from Danny the kind of reconceptualization of justice as multi-species justice. And that was really grounded in relationships with more than human others. That was really a practice of embodiment, emplacement, and attention to the material in her own life, which was the grounding for a new form of theorization in engagement with theories around justice. And from Paul, we heard theory as an evidence-based proposition about patterns in the world. And this was sort of speaking to a material abstraction that's happening across social life. And that this thing that's occurring is an issue because it sort of disembodies our relations and it impacts all aspects of life. And also on that kind of abstraction is a power. It's a world-making power, and that's why it's significant. It's something we should be thinking about. Daniel also gave attention to the material and the myriad of social relations that can be embedded within a thing. And this sort of recalled to me an article that was written, not by Haraway, but about her approach called Writing the Implosion, where students were given an object and asked to describe all the things that came into that single thing. And I think that's a really powerful way to approach at least our attention in ways that we begin to think about what matters in a particular circumstance that we might be attending to in our work. And Daniel made some really nice comments. The one that came up, I think there was even in discussion, good theory reveals something in a new light, which I always think is that's why we do theory, that's what's useful about it. But also we can't do, what do we do in the world without consequences? And that's also why it matters, because these world-making practices actually shape the worlds that we share with others, and they matter. And so our theories matter, the theories we think would matter, as Haraway might say. So the material comes up in my work in the sense that my projects had looked at the region honeyeater, which is an endangered songbird in the southeast of Australia. And the story is basically that over the last decade or a little bit longer, its song has declined in complexity that's thought about as diminishment or decline. And conservationists think that that is a sign of broader processes of loss and extinction for that species. And so by attending to song is kind of the central thing that runs throughout the thesis. It becomes a kind of material object that I think with as a looking at all the different ways that people are thinking this song as a world-making practice, how the song is used to make certain claims about how song functions within the worlds of these birds, but also how it should be attended to. And so the work that the scientists are doing are very much shaping not just the worlds of regions, but the possibilities for the worlds that we share with these birds going forward, and even if that is a possibility. And so a big part of my work has really been to tell that single story. Haraway sort of says, like, you know, you don't want to tell this story over here, but just keep telling this story. And that kind of grounds me, focusing on like the single material and the particulars of that place. And so it's kind of storing as re-description, as re-theorizing, and keeping it, thinking about these relationships with more than human others. That's kind of the focus on the material. So to keep it short, I think in that storing approach, I want to avoid what's been suggested to me as a kind of theory salad where you're just drawing out a whole bunch of stuff and putting it on the page. But it informs the story that you're telling in a way that communicates something important to the reader. and is compelling in a way that sticks with them and shapes the way that perhaps they go about doing their work in the world. And so then offering something to other people, whether it be in the natural sciences, in dialogue with the natural sciences, that help them to see their practices of theory differently, but also to the humanities as well. And so I think going forward after today, I'll be thinking about not holding on to any one theory too tightly, holding on to my own theories loosely and offering them loosely to others that they probably won't look the same once they pick them up, but they might help them to do some of their work differently, and be ready to set them aside if they're no longer useful. Yeah, that's all I'll say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Miles. So now we're through to after lunch and our Rethinking Bodies panel, and reflecting on that is Helen Laird, who's a scholar here at ICS, both, as I understand it, a yoga teacher and a yoga teacher trainer, as well as a scholar of the cultural practices of yoga and how it's reshaping us and how reshaping it. So over to you, Helen.
You looked great. That was a question. How are we reshaping it? It's my question as well. Actually, no, I think we are. Okay, so today's talk was about what is theory, but I think for me what came out was also what is knowledge and how do we understand knowledge and how theory helps us translate knowledge. And that was a really strong theme that came throughout the day for me. Talking to specific speakers, I had Nikita, and I really like the idea of leaning into complexity and difference. And I know, is she still here? She's not. Okay. Oh yes, sorry. I want to sort of like eyeball you there. One of the things I know you were talking about in terms of the tension that people have, which actually also made me think of the susto that people like Linda Green talk about in her. Fear as a way of life with widows in Guatemala. She was also talking about very similar kind of pain within the body as well. But in terms of the complexity that I was thinking about, it actually took me to the complexity of embodiment that I'm working with, and that even within the academic sphere we have so many different ways of seeing what embodiment is, which was the theme of this. So that we've got some people that foreground the socio-political side of it, and other people want to talk about the phenomenological side, and other people go, I don't want to even think about either of those. I'm going to look at the practice of something, and then what can we understand about an embodiment like that. So I think we need to look at knowledge as having lots of complexity even within our discipline, as when we move out into the field as well. So there's lots of different ways at all times to looking at it. The other thing I then was thinking about was with Warwick, was looking at the theory emerges organically, and that was a really nice way of saying that we can read all this theory, but at some point we also need to put it aside so that when then we go out into the field, we can have this background, and it came up also with the haunting. So rather than it can haunt us rather than confine us. And that was something that I felt was a really important idea for me, was that I can have all this here with me, but just let it sit there somewhere, but then go out and see what really emerges. So it's informative rather than confining, which was something that was really useful, because sometimes we like to get very narrow with our ideas. And then Raymond was also talking about connecting knowledge with practice. And I think often, particularly coming from a very strong yogic perspective where yoga is practice, and then coming into the university and the academy where knowledge doesn't necessarily always get connected to practice in a very clear way. It's like there's two sort of almost silos, and it was really nice to hear Raymond saying that they're drawing them back in and underlining that perspective. Recognizing time, and I'm 5:31, I just have one other thing that I want to say, is that the other thing that came out is create your own theory. So don't get bogged down. And with kind of reference to that and reference to embodiment and knowledge, I kind of think that because where's the reference to the white head and the brown body? Perhaps if we were all a little bit more attuned to our sensory experience and our embodiment, we might actually have a very different form of knowledge developed through the academy. So that's my summation.
Wow.
Thank you, Helen. And last but definitely not least, we had our narrative genre and text panel, and reflecting on that is Angela Wong, who's a PhD student in anthropology at Sydney and whose work deals with questions of memory in the context of the Vietnamese diaspora in Australia. So Angela, bring it to a close.
No pressure.
Well, actually, to a sort of second, and then Marlene will bring it to a close.
Okay, I'm going to try and do as much justice as I can to the amazing presentations today. I wanted to say that I really enjoyed the presentations, and I think, I guess just to have a quick summary of what the presentations were, about narrating to theorize, new forms of narrating to theorize, and then the idea of the dilemmas of authorship. So everything today kind of made me think back to this etymology that I found in one of my background readings for this topic. And it's about the word narrative, which comes from nya, which is a Sanskrit of to know. And then it kind of takes form in Latin as well, where there's narus for knowing and narrow for telling. And that's how we kind of get narrative now. I think that's really simplified. So yeah, it's probably much more complex than that. But I also want to connect it back to what Danielle was saying this morning, which was about theory as a way of seeing. Because in a way, in order to narrate, in order to get theory, we need to see. And we need to see before we can know and tell, because we need to see to perceive. And I think that that is really powerful, because what we do in our work is we take all these little moments. And one of the first things I remember when I started this PhD was my supervisor, Robbie Peters, always talking about that ethnographic moment. And I was like, oh, okay, it's just a moment. But then when I was reading through everything in preparation for today, I realized, no, what we do is we are making narratives. We take all these different moments, and then we have a plot that goes through it, and we connect all of these things. And in doing so, we basically create our own theory. And I think what's important to recognize is that, like narratives, theories are co-created. Everything is relational. We don't make this in a vacuum. We have to talk with people in order to understand their life worlds. And I think that's one of the most important things, is that we recognize that that narrative is a way that it's like that saying, I know this sounds so random, but you know that saying where people are like, we're all walking each other home. Is that weird to say?
No, not at all.
Yeah,
I bet you think it's weird.
Not after today, I don't.
But I think part of anthropology is getting to understand people as humans, right? And in order to do that, we need to get into their life worlds. We need to understand how they construct themselves in their own story world, which is, situated, but then also how they're situated in the actual world in which they're telling their story. So, anyway, moving on. I have all these points and they're like...
Maybe just one more minute. That's all right. I'm sorry.
We want that long? Okay. Okay. This is so disembodied. I'm so sorry. I guess it connects to the themes of today. But I think what's important as well is that narratives constitute us as much as we constitute them, right? And I think that's another thing about theory that's so important, is that we need to realize that even though we use theory and we're thinking through theory, we can make theory too. Don't let theory become that agent. Don't let it become the driver. Don't be in the passenger seat. like actually take control of that, and it's okay. Yeah, so to sum things up, sorry, I'm so nervous. I'm so caffeinated. I've never done this before. But yeah, I think that, I think that it's just really interesting because we are so privileged as well as anthropologists to be able to magnify moments and to bring attention to that. Yeah. Sorry, that was really bad.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela, and Helen and Miles and Nicole for drawing together those threads from our 4 panels. And now I'll hand over, and doing it, I mean, I have to say, not only was it a challenge to do that and do it on the spot today in real time, but to do it in 5 minutes. I mean, yeah, so really, thank you all so much. I'm going to hand over to Malini now for some closing remarks.
Theory at threshold. What is theory? Who produces it? For what purposes and to what ends? What does theory do in the worlds that it seeks to interpret, contest, or transform? We had gathered today to interrogate theory not as a finished product, but as a collective, ongoing, and necessarily incomplete project, one that is inseparable from the lives, struggles, and worlds to which it is accountable. The questions that guided our panels today were not merely academic inquiries. They were foundational questions about the conditions under which knowledge emerges, circulates, and acts. Theory, as we know, is not neutral, never produced in a vacuum. It is situated historically, politically, affectively. It arises out of struggle, crisis, out of the need to make sense of a world that is uneven, fractured, and often violent. For scholars working across the social sciences and the humanities, theory is not simply a tool of analysis. It is a generative space of confrontation, speculation, and intervention. It shapes how we apprehend the world, how we inhabit it, and crucially, how we reimagine and enact alternatives to it. Across disciplines, theory operates as both structure and rupture. It provides the conceptual vocabularies, the apparatuses through which we frame questions and formulate problems. It informs our methods, our empirical engagements, and our ethical orientation. Yet, what counts as theory, what it is meant to accomplish, who is authorized to produce it, are themselves contested and contingent. Now, these differences reveal theory's own historicity, how it emerges from specific geographies, epistemologies, and positionalities, how it travels, sometimes forcefully, sometimes fugitively, across boundaries, and how it entangles with power, language, and life. To speak of theory today is to speak from within a world in crisis. We inhabit a moment marked by resurgent authoritarianism, the proliferation of unthinkable, unspeakable, unseeable violence, the normalization of displacement, the return of hunger as a weapon, and the brutal hardening of borders. In such a world, theory cannot be an abstraction removed from the urgencies of the present. It must be responsive to the material and the affective terrains in which it is embedded. It must account for the ways in which knowledge itself can reproduce or resist the forces it seeks to analyze. As this symposium has shown, the world is not a stable terrain. Histories are contested and contingent. Geographies are porous and unsettled. Sovereignty is never absolute. Borders, often imagined as fixed lines of exclusions, are also sites of encounter, negotiation, and resistance. These are spaces where power is made visible, but also where its limits are exposed. To theorize the present, then, is to trace its violences and to attend to the forms of life and the possibilities that emerge from its shadows. To inhabit the present demands forms of thought that are themselves provisional, mobile, and relational. The present then requires theories that are capacious enough to hold contradiction between life and death, presence and absence, and the ephemeral and the durable. The present calls for an engagement with theory that is multilingual, multidisciplinary, that moves across genres, affects, and ontologies, that recognizes how knowledge is made not only in the academy, but in movements, in memory, in refusal, and above all in the everyday. Theory must also reckon with its own complicities, with the institutions and the structures that shape its production, with the hierarchies it may reproduce, with the voices it excludes and marginalizes. At the same time, theory has always been a site of radical potential and continues a grammar for the otherwise, a method of thinking beyond the known, and above all, a practice of unsettling. On behalf of Michael Edwards, Sophie Chow, Daniel Tranter Santoso, and Tulika Dubey, members of the organizing committee, I thank our speakers and postgraduate participants for reminding us that theory is not distant or disembodied. Your words and engagements have so brilliantly foregrounded theory as a way of navigating a world in a flux, forged through dialogue, through resistance, and collaboration. Today we are reminded of a vision of theory that remains open to difference, to transformation, and to the labor of unlearning. A vision that moves across disciplines and borders. So in closing, let us carry forward a vision of theory that remains open and one that resists closure. Thank you, everyone.